Welcome, State of Tel Aviv. We had some technical difficulties today, so you're going to see that this podcast with Yaakov Katz is broken into two parts. I had to move from one platform to another. And in the second bit, which is about 10 minutes long, you'll see a lot more of Yaakov than me because my screen kept freezing, but that doesn't matter. This is an update about what's going on here on the ground, what we're seeing, hearing, understanding, and wanted to get this out as quickly as possible. So this is going to have to suffice for an introduction today. Yaakov and I, of course, get into what happened overnight, the military attack by America on Iran's nuclear sites, and what is happening here in Israel on the ground, what retaliatory actions and strikes we've undergone so far, and what may be in the works in the days to come. I'm also dealing with, usual life stuff, like there's a problem with my safe room door, so I've been basically calling everyone I can. It will be fixed today. And pigeons. I've got pigeons out of nowhere. Kind of found a way into to nest. And, whatever. Life goes on, right? God bless the pigeons. So thanks for being here. I'm Vivian Bercovici, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. And here's the latest. So let's do it. Okay. 1 p.m. on Sunday, June 22nd. And for those of us who slept, we woke up to a very different world this morning. How about you, Yaakov? Did you get any sleep last night in Jerusalem?
I got some sleep, and my wife woke me up at 5 a.m. and said, "You should probably get up. There's something big happening." And definitely, this was what you wake up for. Yes.
This was a wake-up moment, exactly. But until 5 a.m., it was reasonably quiet in Jerusalem in terms of sirens and everything.
Yeah, we didn't have a siren all day yesterday. We had one, of course, this morning in the aftermath, but we didn't have one on Saturday. Did we have one? We had one Friday afternoon, I feel like. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Saturday was pretty quiet everywhere, which I noticed. But let's just go, big night. Big night. The United States of America pulled out its B-2 bombers and went and took out not only the deep underground nuclear bunker at Fordo in Iran, but I understand also big hits on Isfahan and Natanz. So Yaakov, you're the expert. Tell us why your wife woke you up at 5 a.m.
This is huge for a number of reasons. First of all, it's very big because what the American military can do is unparalleled to what any other military in the world can do. So as much as Israel has done with the damage that it has already caused over the last week to Iran and its nuclear facilities, absent or minus Fordo, which Israel had yet to touch or try anything with, Natanz, Isfahan, and some of the others, impressive and probably enough to have sustained or dealt a serious blow, but nothing the likes of what a couple of B-2 bombers can do with the MOP, the GBU-57, the massive ordnance penetrator, about a 14-ton bomb that can seriously penetrate facilities and take care of business. And that's what Donald Trump did last night or early this morning when he sent a number of B-2 bombers with a dozen MOPs that were dropped just on Fordo and another few that were dropped on Natanz, and then Tomahawk missiles to go with on Isfahan and also Natanz. So really kind of just making sure everything was done. And I always felt that there were a number of options. I think we spoke about this last week of what the president could potentially do, right? He could just go for Fordo. He could do the other nuclear facilities. He could take out also military installations. He went for the middle ground, right? So he said, okay, we're going to stay focused on the nuclear program and we're going to cripple Iran's nuclear program. And that's been done. For that reason, enough. But I think there's a much bigger message here that comes with what America did. And that is that the U.S. is taking action, is getting involved. Every president since Bill Clinton has said that Iran getting a nuclear weapon is a red line. We've seen in the past what happens to red line promises of U.S. presidents like Barack Obama when he spoke about chemical weapons that Syria would use and then let that red line be crossed in 2013 and never did anything to back it up. We've seen lots of just rhetoric over the years. And finally, Donald Trump is taking action, showing that America is not willing to tolerate this. And that's a big moment. And I think that's a message that cannot but resonate so widely and so broadly throughout the world and really impact other conflicts that might not even have anything to do definitely with the Middle East, but if you're Russia, Ukraine, you gotta be thinking about this. If you're China, you gotta
Right.
be thinking about this. I mean, this has much wider repercussions.
Absolutely. This is new. This is global order, geopolitical order, and power repercussions. I want to just focus in on two things briefly. One is you mentioned, of course, the 2013 red line when Obama said to Assad, "You use chemical weapons on your people, and that's it. It's a red line. We're going to hit you militarily." And of course, he did not. As we both know, shortly after, when President Trump was in power, exactly the same situation. He said, "If you use chemical weapons," and he did attack Syria when Hafez al-Assad deployed chemical weapons against his population. So there is this kind of not so much a track record, but I do think that Middle Eastern leaders look at President Trump differently. And they see him as someone who is unpredictable, but prone to taking extreme action. I also, just because things go at such a crazy clip here, right? That I just wanted to go back 48 hours. So on Friday, as we were all preparing for Shabbat for our weekend and hoping for some quiet after a pretty wacky, wild week, we were hearing a lot of stuff and a lot of mixed messages. And that's typically a kind of sign that something's up. And in particular, I'm going to focus on the mixed messaging out of the White House. President Trump says he's going to take 2 weeks. He needs 2 weeks. He may do less, but he's going to take up to 2 weeks and he's going to make his decision. And then Vice President Vance was deployed a number of times. And Vance has been, I don't know what he really thinks, but he has been set up publicly to be the naysayer. So there were reports that both Vance and Witkoff were saying to Trump, "Don't do it, don't do it." And we all know that Witkoff is a person who has Trump's ear and is influential in there. And JD Vance has been set up as being the kind of more isolationist presence in the White House. Not our war, stay out of it. And then there were reports that JD Vance, Bibi Netanyahu, and I can't remember who the third person was, but it was on the Israeli side, had a half-hour phone call.
Dermer and the IDF Chief of Staff Ayal Zamir. Yeah.
Okay. So it was Ron Dermer, his Minister of Special Affairs, basically his Minister of Everything, and the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, and Vice President J.D. Vance had a half-hour call that was very tense, which was to lead us to believe that America was saying, "No, we're not doing this." And that was on Friday. So all of that together, and I do have witch-like powers, but I was looking at all of that and thinking something's up because they're trying to kind of relax and send out these nothing imminent messages, which is exactly what we did before the first strike, and then kaboom. So I want to remind people just how quickly things change, and what I've just kind of reiterated is a sliver of the information, the psyop stuff, everything that's constantly kind of in the masher in this region. But here we are. And so clearly a decision at that point that we were told that Vance was saying, at that point, a decision had already been made, very likely, and they knew when. So what I'd like you to do now is tell us, firstly, we know we've inflicted damage that you just summarized in Iran. What's been done in retaliation? What have the Iranians done here?
Well, in response, the Iranians launched missiles, of course, at Israel. We were all in bomb shelters earlier this morning, and there were some that struck directly in Tel Aviv as well as in Haifa. They, I think, was a barrage of about 30 missiles, more or less. It's very difficult for them, and I think this also has to be noted, to get off barrages of 100 missiles or even close to that. It's nowhere near what they originally assumed that they would be able to do, and that's largely the result because the skies over Iran are basically ruled and controlled by Israel today. Israel's able to put up probably, I would, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess upwards of about 100 drones, if not more, a couple hundred even, that are just hovering over Iran at any given moment. And they're hunting launchers. And And we've even seen videos that the IDF has put out of how these drone pilots are flying and flying their machines and are able to intercept. And when they see a launcher, they're able to take it out. This is the key number. Israel believes it's already taken out about half of the launchers that Iran had going into this. The number is more or less roughly around 350, 400, which would make sense because it's about one launcher for 10 missiles. But the overall, Iran has a number of other cards up its sleeve, Vivian, and that's going to be the question of what they're going to do, right? They could attack U.S. assets and bases in the region. They could attack ships that are trying to traverse the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea. They could attack the oil and gas infrastructure in American allies, countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE. So they have what to do. I think that their big question now is going to be, do we actually do anything? Do we swallow our pride? They know that they're in trouble. And the president made that very clear with the remarks that he made of, if you attack us, I will obliterate you pretty much.
Yes, and his comments, when Iran said, "Well, maybe, kinda, sort of, maybe we'll talk," and he's like, "Full surrender or see you later, alligator."
Ex-
But as we were talking, I also, remembered reading this morning at some point that the supreme leader of Iran also made a statement at some point saying that legitimate targets, are American military and civilian. So this, of course, applies not just to the commercial ships that may be sort of stuck in the Strait of Hormuz or somewhere in the area, in the region. There's a much broader implication potentially to this. We know that the IRGC has sleeper cells all over the world. They are active in many places, including the countries from which you and I hail. And I would expect that these threats would also put many parts of Europe on high alert. And the fact that they're overtly saying, you're all targets. I don't care if you're a 6-month-old baby, you're in our sights. This kind of takes things to the next level because Iran does tend to play a little dirtier than, in my view, either America or Israel.
No, I think 100% right. And I think that the Iranians, we know there was a report over the weekend that the Cypriot police had arrested a British Iranian who was plotting something in Cyprus. We know that there's a lot of Israelis who are now there stranded. Personally, I was one of them until a few days ago. So the thought did cross my mind when I was also there that there might actually be something happen. But Iran has many abilities. We've seen over the years, they've been able to strike at the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. They struck at the AMIA building also in the same city. They bombed diplomat car in India, New Delhi, a couple years ago. Thankfully, no one was hurt. There were plots that were foiled to attack the Israeli embassy in Azerbaijan, to down an Israeli airliner in Turkey. They have capabilities all over the world, from the tri-border area in South America to Africa to the Middle East and to Southeast Asia. Israelis need to be careful and vigilant, and Jews need to be careful and vigilant today. And this is something that I think will definitely run for a while now, because if Iran doesn't decide to retaliate now against America, it could say, we'll swallow it for now. We don't want to lose the regime. We don't want to give Trump an excuse to keep attacking us, but we'll save the fight for another day. And I would presume and predict that it will come.
So speaking of stranded Israelis in Cyprus, I heard this morning it's something like 6,000 people. And, they tend to clump and they tend to be loud and they tend to speak Hebrew. And so I just really do hope that they kind of keep their voices down and keep a low profile because they are sitting ducks if they're all kind of grouped together. So that's what we kind of know with respect to kind of what's happened to this point. But let's get into the broader potential geopolitical implications of this. We also know that last weekend, President Putin had some conversations, both separate conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu and with President Trump. And that very shortly after those two conversations, all Russian personnel, we were told, were taken out of Iran. And I don't think that President Putin has any appetite or desire to get mixed in this. and we can only assume what the message was that was given to him. So Putin, let's assume for now, unless you have different information, is somewhat neutralized in the immediate theater of war. Where do the Chinese fit in?
So, I've been thinking about this and been asked before, and kind of I've been talking to other people as well. It doesn't seem. I mean, what benefit would Russia or China have from getting involved in all of this? Right? No one. Definitely, the Russians don't want to see America get involved. America's not looking for a fight with Russia. I think you're reading it as I am, that Putin is trying to balance his different interests here, which is, yeah, he has an alliance with the Iranians. They have been helping one another out during their different conflicts, but he doesn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. He doesn't want to pick a fight with the West. He doesn't want to lose. He said about Israel, Israel's pretty much a Russian country, right? When he spoke
Yeah,
the
I
other
gotta
day.
mention that. He said it again yesterday. Exactly. He said Israel's like practically a Russian country. There are 2 million Russian speakers there. So like I'm not attacking Russia.
Exactly. What do I want? I want to endanger my own people. I mean, whether that's coming where what exactly the interest there is, probably a self-interest, but he's not that far off from reality in how many Russian speakers there are in this country. And the Chinese, yeah, they need Iran for the oil. They need that continued supply. That is important to them. And I think that there's a reason why both America definitely, but Israel as well, has not really been going after the oil refineries, has not really been going after economic targets. I think really the big question now, Viv, is what's next? Right. And I think that's what we will be waiting to see, because this could go a number of ways. On the one hand, you could now call it over. You could say, I'm done, right? Israel did damage to the nuclear facilities. America has pretty much wrapped up the business with that. Of course, they still have ballistic missiles. They still have some launchers, but you've caused them significant damage there, at least according to what Israel is publicly saying. And therefore, you could say, I'm done. But if Israel is not done, then that leads me to believe that there are other interests at play here. And it's not just the nuclear and crippling the nuclear infrastructure, because that's probably finished by now. This is more about what can we do to the regime and whether we can
Right.
potentially weaken it to the point that it can be overthrown by the people of Iran. And that is going to be a big question that I don't know when and how and what the point is that you could say that I've succeeded, or when do you say, you know what, it's enough already? And I think we also have to be careful as a country not to fall into a war of attrition. So with all the praise for what's happened, we don't want to find ourselves in a place that once a week now the Iranians are firing a missile at Israel, right?
Right.
Or once every 2-3 days. Even just one is enough, as we've seen, to cripple our airspace, or to paralyze, close our airspace, to cripple commercial flight industry and aerospace industry to this country, to shut down schools and businesses. So I wouldn't want to be in that situation, but we'll have to wait to see where they go with it.
To all our subscribers, thank you so much, because everyone's support matters. And we really want to keep as many people kind of plugged in and informed as possible. But I will ask you again, for those, especially our regular listeners and readers, to please consider taking out a paid subscription today. It is important. We really do need the resources, and we work really hard around the clock to provide you with the best commentators, commentary, and information, both in written and podcast form. So please consider supporting us today. And I always invite you to do that as a founding member, if the spirit moves you. Have a good one. Thanks for being here, as always. So, I mean, that does bring up a really important point, which is what's going on in Iran, on the streets, domestically. We know, of course, that the supreme leader manages to tweet frequently, but that the internet has been totally cut off for all Iranians internally, and that people are really kind of struggling to just communicate with loved ones who are in Iran to confirm that they're okay, what's going on. There are dribs and drabs of reports that kind of seep out about violence, about the regime cracking down, about mass arrests and beatings. Many people are saying and asking, why are they not rising up? Why are the people not taking this opportunity to push for the regime change? I think there's a consensus that about 80%, if not more, of the population loathes this regime and wants regime change. There are significant forces lined up outside of Iran, including the wannabe Shah, who would very much love to return to his throne in Tehran. So, what's going on inside is a bit of a question mark. Israel has said, I'm sure you watched the half-hour interview with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, and Ayala Hassan that was on yesterday, the day before. And she questioned him and said, well, what about regime change? And he said, well, yeah, well, what about it? He said, look, our primary goal is to take out their nuclear capability and their missiles, and that's what we're doing. If there was to be that added consequence, and it was, of course, to be a good outcome in terms of stability and type of government, we wouldn't be against it, he said wryly. But these are the kinds of things that are kind of swirling around. What we're not seeing is or hearing of is any apparent movement or push to overthrow. But that's what you were just starting to touch.
Yeah, I think that this is also Iran is a massive country, right? Ted Cruz might not know the population when he was asked by Tucker Carlson, but anyone can Google it. They're almost 10 times our size, about 8 times, 9 times. They're huge. The thought that we can somehow manipulate and engineer an overthrow and a new regime, I think might be a bit over ambitious. I think what we can do, practically speaking, is provide the opportunity and create the opportunity to be there for the people to grab it. Now, for that to happen, you are right, and you kind of hinted at this. The internet has to be opened. Right. People have to be able to converse and have to be able to organize. At the moment, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, will the Iranian people pick this up and use this opportunity? I don't know. And is there a way to maybe push them a little more and prod them? And can the world help with that? Potentially, yes. I definitely wouldn't count on the Europeans for anything. I think if anyone will try to do anything, it would be Israel first and foremost, maybe with some American help. But I'll also say one last thing. You know the world of diplomacy firsthand better than I do, Viv. And I think that we can safely assume that if the president said to the prime minister, listen, I'll take out these 3 facilities, but that's it, we're done, then that would be it, then we would be done. But if the president said, I'll take out these facilities, but you guys keep going if you want to try to bring about the toppling of this regime, because this is a unique opportunity, then Israel might be tempted to go down that road. This was always going to be different than what we saw in 81 in Iraq and Iraq in 2007 in Al-Kibar in Syria. It was always going to be not just a one-off strike. It was always going to be something different. But the question really is, okay, at what point does Israel say, we're done? Now it's up to the people of Iran to figure out what they want with their lives.
So, 2 things, and then we're going to wrap. You brought up Europe, and I was going to bring up Europe. The EU seems to me to be a little fractured these days. And we, of course, just came off the G7 summit that was in beautiful, beautiful Kananaskis country in Western Canada. It's kind of a little piece of the Rockies out there. And there were lots of really important communiques that were issued by the leaders who were there. But President Trump bailed very early on, which basically said, what you're doing here is irrelevant. I got real stuff to do. And he left clearly to plan for this attack. You have French President Macron, who is saying, stop this madness. He is quite overtly supportive of the Iranian regime and is just bizarre. But France has always been.
Mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. Yeah.
It is fine. What comes out of Macron's mouth, honestly, sometimes, I know he has a very large Muslim population, but he treats this dictatorial, violent, theo-fascist regime with such reverence. It's incredible. So there's Macron saying what he says. There's Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, who sees himself as the king of the world at times, who is basically saying, ceasefire, de-escalate. Okay, thanks. Here's Starmer, who is sort of saying the same thing, but he also came out yesterday with I can't really join in this military pylon in Iran because they're going to attack military bases on UK soil. I have a really big problem with a fifth column here. He made a statement to that effect yesterday, but that's like, wow. And then you've got Chancellor Merz, who everybody was saying is kind of weak and this and that. Chancellor Merz came out in the last day or two swinging, and he said,
Yeah.
Israel's doing the dirt work for all of us. They're doing the heavy lifting, and we owe them enormous gratitude for dealing with this. So when you've got Germany, which in my view, basically as goes Germany, goes the EU. I mean, Germany is the powerhouse, 90 million people, huge landmass, always the kind of big thing that controls in many ways the EU and the direction it takes. You got Germany, you got Macron, you got bits and pieces here and there, but I see a dog's breakfast. So if there's this new alignment coming together geopolitically, it looks to me like it's kind of America, Germany, Israel's in there, and Saudi and all the other countries that have been quiet, but that we know support Israel in this action that it's taking against Iran and destroying its nuclear capability. So, and of course, Qatar is in there and quiet, and I view them as being on the side of Iran, but we'll just leave that for now. So, you have this kind of mess and this lack of, there's not a very strong, compelling leadership in Europe. Merz is very new. He still has to establish himself, but he is certainly, in my view, positioning himself as a leader and someone prepared to take a strong stand. Do you agree with that?
No, I think, it was very telling to watch how the European foreign ministers were meeting with Argarchi, the foreign minister of Iran, as the planning of all of this was taking place, right? They're trying to bring peace to the region, peace in our time, if I want to borrow from another former European foreign minister of the past, Chamberlain. But anyhow, this it shows it shows how they're in the dark. They don't know what's going on. But B is that Europe is always what it's been, which is, and you mentioned Macron, and we don't understand. I mean, it's mind blowing how he's been capitulating in such a way to the radical Islamists over the last, I would say, few years, but definitely even more so in the last week and a half since this all began with Iran, or a little less. But Europe is lost, Vivian, and I think that that's the big takeaway for us here. They're not, you mentioned the Germans, and they stand out, and they're special in that sense. And I think they really do take the responsibility that they feel towards the Jewish people and still care deeply. But the rest of that place, it's not anyone we can rely on.
I think that's absolutely right. The Gulf region, though, I think even though they're quiet and hunkering down, are pretty much firmly in the U.S. Israel camp. Would you agree?
100%. And I'll go even farther. I'll say that I would not be surprised if in the next 6 months we have a normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and the war with Gaza will hopefully be over, of course, before then, and the remaining hostages will hopefully be brought home before then. And just today, we're told of the retrieval of 3 bodies of hostages who were brought back from Gaza. So, that effort does continue alongside everything else going on. But there is a new chapter that can be written today about the Middle East. And the Middle East is safer, it's more stable. And Iran, which has been a threat to not just Israel, but to all the Sunni states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, you name it. This realignment today that now is made possible is something that I think we will hopefully very soon be able to begin seeing the fruits of what happened. One of my kids asked me as we were sitting in the bomb shelter this morning, they said, "Do you think peace is now possible?" And I said, "Well, with Iran, I don't know, right? Will depend on what happens there. But the rest of this region, 100%." And this is made possible as a result of what Israel has done, and of course, as a result of what Donald Trump has done.
No, I think that, thank you, Chancellor Merz, for saying it so clearly, no BS, right? No qualifications. He just came right out and said it. Listen, I'm a little disheartened by what you're saying because I'm already sort of planning my move to Tehran. I figure it's going to be even better than Moscow was in the 90s. So I do hope that Iranian people manage to coalesce and bring in a new, kinder, gentler regime. Wrapping up with the hostages and one other point before we get to the hostages. One of the things I've learned that you may have been aware of, because of course we're all immersed in Iran, in Iranian culture, and we're very focused, we Westerners, on what we've hit, what the retaliation has been, what's been knocked out, how many dead. We are very focused on these facts and figures, and understandably, because they're very important. To a person, when I've spoken to an Iranian expert, they say, what we should really be focused on is not the kind of the stuff. I mean, the missile launchers, yes, but they're much less concerned about Fordo or Isfahan or Natanz, and they say it's the people. So remember, on days 1 and 2 of this operation, Israel took out something like 15 nuclear scientists and top physicists. And you're thinking, like, wow, those are really precise hits so early in an operation. But if I can reduce my many conversations to one, what these Iran experts say is it is very much a cultural thing in Iran. When you have an important senior position like that, you have it for decades. So it's not like where we train teams and the number two can kind of move in. There is that top layer, and then there's like a big gap between what comes next. So taking out the top talent is actually, in the view of many, more important than hard military targets. That accord with what you've been hearing and know?
I think it's a combination of everything, right? If you look at who Israel took out and what they're calling Operation Narnia or the Red Wedding, which is a reference to that famous Game of Thrones episode, the elimination of the nuclear scientists in particular, there were two groups that were taken out. There were the military commanders that was meant to paralyze the ability to launch missiles back at Israel, to regroup, taking out command and control, and then to hunt after the launchers and, of course, the missile stockpiles. The second category were the scientists, but they handpicked the scientists. It wasn't every nuclear scientist. It were ones who were working on specific parts of the nuclear bomb process. And those were ones who were intricately involved or deeply involved in different pieces and components that one day will come together to create the weapon. Having removed those people will not stop them, because everyone's replaceable. All knowledge can be passed on to someone else. And the Iranians who have already mastered this technology could definitely do it once again. But that is a massive blow. And also, facilities can all be rebuilt. I mean, what really is needed here is to take away the will to move forward. Because if a country wants nuclear weapons, what we've seen in history is that they have a good chance of getting them. And therefore, unless they make that change of their calculus in their own minds and say, this is not for us because the price is too high, or we want to come into the fold of the West, or whatever the reason might be, that's the way to stop them. And hopefully, I think the American intervention here is what will maybe get the Iranians to realize we can't afford this. This is beyond what we're able to sustain. And therefore, our best interest is to actually stop.
The hostages, and then we're done. I was hearing somewhere in the flood of information we all are drowning in, that there was this great, beautiful vision where Iran was basically forced to surrender. Qatar was basically forced to, exert and use its pressure and tell Hamas, give them up. It's done. We're over. Give us all the hostages. And I guess then the lion lies down with the lamb. I don't know. But the hostage situation, there are 20 who we believe are alive. God knows how they're suffering. Can you throw us a bone, Yaakov? Something
I'll tell
that
you what gives me
might
hope, Viv, is,
allow us to be.
no, I'll tell you what gives me hope is that with everything going on, the distraction, and we spoke about this, how people were distracted. They weren't thinking about the hostages. But today, at the same time that this is going on with Iran, the bodies of Yonatan Semerano, Shai Levinson, Ofra Kedar brought back to Israel. And in a very complicated Shin Bet joint IDF operation, it shows that we're not forgetting. And that is super important throughout this period. So I hope that the overall story of the Middle East and the weakening of Iran and the degrading of its capabilities will further isolate Hamas and get it to understand it needs to make a deal. But thankfully, at least we're not forgetting those who are still there, languishing and waiting for us to bring them back.
No, we are not. Yakov, thank you so much for being available on what I know will be a wildly busy day for you, but I guess they're not up yet in North America. So you got to keep going for a few hours, right?
Thank you very much, Vivian.
Always fantastic. Thank you. Have a good day. Peaceful day.
Talk to you.
Okay, so I just finished that chat with Yakov Katz, and shortly after 2 now. We will do our best to get this out as quickly as possible. Depends, of course, on how many sirens we have. My sound editor guy lives in a different part of the country that seems to be getting hit much more frequently. Where I am, it's very, very quiet. But I just really wanted to get something out quickly to give you a situational kind of how we're feeling, what we're seeing and experiencing on the ground here. And it's going to be an interesting few days. What can I say? We'll be back. I'm going to try to give you updates as frequently as possible. And in the meantime, for those of you in Israel, stay safe, close to a shelter, and who knows what tomorrow brings. Thanks for being here. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager, who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.